Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report, Markets, Finance, and Scandals. Let's bring in political analyst Stacy Herbert, shall we?
Hi, Max Keiser.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Very well.
What's happening?
Well, we're going to take a little step back and look at the midterm elections coming up, some of the big issues going on, and what might possibly happen. First off, this is Biden to Dems that didn't get everything they wanted. Buck up. So let's just take a little look at a clip.
What the president's been able to do has been truly remarkable with the help of a Democratic Congress. And so those who didn't get everything they wanted, it's time to just buck up here, understand that we can make things better, continue to move forward, but not yield the playing field to those folks who are against everything that we stand for in terms of the initiatives we put forward.
So he's saying that people should buck up, which kind of reminds me of the famous episode we did where Charlie Munger said people should just suck it up. So there's this real attack starting to happen, you see, from the ruling class, the elites, the top 1%, telling people to just suck it in, buck up, forget about the widespread crime wave that has destroyed your wealth, destroyed your country, destroyed your markets, your finance, your economies. Just, get over it. Time to move on.
These folks in Washington, they don't think that, and on Wall Street too, they don't think that their actions have any consequences, and they just think that if they aggregate huge amounts of wealth, that somehow that's in everyone's best interest. And they don't see themselves as being even capable of committing any kind of social injustice, or that their policies over the past 25 years have caused huge, wide-scale social unrest and poverty and ecological holocaust all over the world. And this is this is the biggest problem. This is the biggest problem of 9/11, is that the people in Washington became even more insular and self-absorbed than they were before 9/11. This is what Osama knew. This is what Osama knew when he attacked the towers on 9/11, that the American character, the people who run the country, are so vain, so insular, so greedy, that when he committed this relatively minor act on the grand scale of atrocities, doesn't even qualify in the top 10 probably in the last 100 years, that the American establishment and the rich folk in America would suddenly believe that they had been elevated to near divinity. Thus, Hank Paulson saying, suddenly, CEO of Goldman Sachs, he's doing God's work. That's the direct outcome of 9/11. You see, his insanity went ballistic.
But speaking of vain, greedy, and arrogant, Larry Summers, optimistic about middle class. He says, people aren't going to live with their parents forever. So that's the one hope, you Americans. Okay, buck up. You're not going to have to live with your parents forever, just until you're about 60, maybe 70 years old. And then you can, maybe they'll be dead by then.
Again, Larry Summers, he's never actually worked a day in his life. He's written some white papers that no one's ever read. He's got great connections, and apparently he's like the equivalent of a beltway fluffer, okay, who works in Washington, kind of keeping people anxious, But his actual skill set is zero. He has no skill set.
Well, I believe he was part of the whole crew in the Clinton administration that helped overturn Glass-Steagall and introduce the Commodities Futures Trading Act. Modernization Act. So thus, he caused this crisis. So he's trying to apologize to the people. Well, so what? You have to live with your mom until you're 70. But you know what? It's not so bad.
Again, this idea that, the French have a saying where the orifice, I can't even say it. It's not on this show. I'll say it on another show.
You have to say it on French television. You can't
I can only say that on French television.
Here we have these guys in their ivory tower. Down on the street, here's the next headline. Washington's most toxic asset, a yes vote on TARP. So they focus on Indiana's 2nd District and Joe Donnelly, who's facing a challenge from a Tea Party candidate. And one of the primary issues in this election is that people are angry that this guy, he's a Democrat, voted yes for the TARP bailout. And he's saying that his opponent obviously does not understand that without these steps, i.e. TARP, credit would have completely frozen up. There would have become no loans available. There would have been bank collapses across the country, and there would have been a global economic collapse.
Right, and Charles Manson thinks that he had a legitimate reason to murder Sharon Tate. And these guys on Washington believe, like a psychopath, that they had a legitimate reason to hold the U.S. economy and global economy hostage and rape and pillage and commit financial atrocities in the name of greed. They believe it's perfectly normal because they're psychopaths and they belong in a hospital. They belong in a straitjacket. Do yourself a favor, fund a disbursement of straitjackets to these bankers in Wall Street and just put them in Thorazine, get them shocked up with Thorazine, and put them away.
That is a problem, okay? Wall Street, these Wall Street corporations own the politicians. Their threat was that they were going to cut off credit and loans to you, the population. This takes me to the next headline. Fans hit team owner where it hurts, his credit line. So the population is the equivalent of the fans in this situation. Liverpool Football Club in Britain is owned and managed by American Tom Hicks and his son Tom Jr. The two men have apparently not endeared themselves to the fans because they've, bankrupted the football club. Because they're bankrupt, they've lost a load of good players and they've sunk down the ratings. So now there's a deadline looming for them to roll over a loan on October 15th to Royal Bank of Scotland. Well, the fans found out that Hicks were trying to refinance this loan because they were spotted outside the offices of JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank in New York last week. So the fans then went in attack mode, and they started twittering, and letters were posted, and within hours, senior executives were bombarded with mail. Don't give this guy money. Do not lend him money.
Let me explain something about sports teams. It's like the airplane business. The same group of guys, businessmen on Wall Street, who like to buy airplanes and who like to buy sports teams are, they're born inadequate. They're born inadequate, and they're not filling their underwear in a big way, let's say. And as to compensate for this, they end up trying to buy airplanes and sports teams to overcome their inadequacy. And they don't really buy it for a good business purpose. And it always ends in tears. Just about every leveraged buyout of a sports team or an airline always ends in the same tragic way. They're inadequate, and they have great political connections, and they can borrow money if it's 0% interest rate. A rhesus monkey could make money doing that, but somehow they figured out a way to lose money.
Well, let's go back to the story, because the fans wrote this letter to JP Morgan and to Deutsche Bank, and the letter reads in part, "If you join Tom Hicks in raping and pillaging Liverpool Football Club, then you will be making a very powerful enemy. You are facing an energized, well-informed mass of Liverpool fans from around the world." So I'm trying to say that, if these bankers own the U.S. economy, if they own our politicians, there seems to be a way that we can also write letters to these bankers. If you loan another dime to our government, we're going to be angry.
Well, I've done a study. I've done a study of every corporation in the world, and I've looked at how hated various companies are. Obviously, BP is hated, Monsanto, Exxon. Coca-Cola is also a hated company because of what they do in South America and India. Now, I have determined, using my own financial metrics, that if the global diaspora of disgruntled victims of the global banking and corporate occupation wanted to join together en masse and drop a company down to zero for the sole purpose of demonstrating to the banking occupying forces that you have some power, it's Coca-Cola. If everybody in the world listening to me right now simply stopped drinking Coca-Cola for 6 months, the entire balance of power between corporations and people would change in 6 months.
Well, we've been covering the fact that people in Europe are rising up. They're protecting themselves from their governments. And that's the final headline here as we lead into the midterm elections in the United States, when people like Larry Summers are telling people it's going to be okay. You will only, you won't have to live with mom too much longer. And Vice President Joe Biden is telling the people to, buck up, suck it up, just stiff upper lip. Here's the final headline: America on the brink of a second revolution. This is Paul B. Farrell, commentary, 2010 elections guarantee gridlock, anti-capitalist class war. And he's reporting on a report by Professor Robert Morici, a former chief economist at the International Trade Commission, called Decadence of Election 2010. And he expects basically that it's going to lead to a second revolution because, number one, expect nothing positive from Dems, the GOP, or the Tea Party. Okay, they have no positive solutions on offer. Number 5 on his list, all partisan political leaders are destined to sabotage America. He says America's leaders are a bunch of second-rate incompetents, which, however, as you were blaming the population for not standing up for themselves, reminded me of H.L. Mencken's quote, "As democracy is perfected, the office of president represents more and more closely their inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron."
And that's what happened.
That's what happened. America's occupied by morons. Everywhere you look, whether it's the red team or the blue team, i.e. the Democrats or the Republicans in the White House, they hire nincompoops and morons like Larry Summers or Hank Paulson. They're both morons. It's just a matter of like shading of the moronic.
All right, and this revolution is not going to happen for the simple reason that, here, watch me, I'm going to stop the revolution from happening. Hey, you there, who you're upset about the fact that you've had your life destroyed and all your money stolen, you're thinking about getting active and maybe pushing back against the corporate occupation? Here's $1. Here's $1. Go away. Bye. I mean, they're cheap. Americans are essentially cheap. They sell themselves cheap. They work too cheap. They consume cheap stuff. And they're cheap. They're cheap. They're cheap, baby. They are cheap. They're not worth it. Forget it. Let's move on. Let's move on. Forget America. It's gone. It's all history now. Iceland is more interesting. It's more democratic. It's more progressive. The politicians have brains. The banking system's been reformed. Think about Iceland as America 2.0. America is gone. You've got the Rio Grande all the way up to Canada, and that's it. Forget it. It's toast. I don't want to talk about it anymore. The place is, it's a blah, blah, blah.
My political analysis just can't top that, Max, so I think it's time to say goodbye.
So soon?
I think so, Max.
Anyway, thanks for being, on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, well, we're going to come back after this break, so don't go away because there's a lot more coming your way.
Imagine your life out of big cities. Eco-friendly air. Crystal clear water. Soft energy. Organic food. Living in harmony with nature. Sounds impossible? Some people have already chosen. A place under the sun on RT. Every month we give you the future. We help you understand how we'll get there and what tomorrow will bring. The best in science and technology from across Russia and around the world. Join us for Technology Update on RT.
Yes, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Arizona to talk with Ecuadorian journalist and filmmaker Oscar Leon. Oscar produced and directed Once Upon a Time in Arizona. Oscar, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. Good talking to you.
All right, Oscar, tell us about Once Upon a Time in Arizona. What's the film about?
The film, in brief lines, is about one of the consequences of the uncontrolled capitalism or plutocracy that we live now. I came following that consequence, if you will, from my country, Ecuador, because my last documentary was about a revolution. And at the end of the documentary, there was this factor of, like, why even if the people rises and wakes up, there's no change, you know? And the answer is because, obviously, the power is not lying in there. So as another consequence of that, I came here where the wall of shame was. And in the last 3 years I've been here, I've been working, filming, and doing some reporting. Okay, certainly the Arizona is a hot-button issue. Immigration, of course, is the key there. It's the front line. You've got the politicians in America using the immigration in Arizona as a wedge issue, as a hot state,
to put forth their political propaganda in many ways. It's simply a way to rouse up the population, regardless of whether this issue makes any underlying economic or political sense. But as a result, real hardworking people get hurt and are scapegoated. Are South Americans being basically Mexicans being scapegoated at this point for the failure of America to produce a real global economy?
I think it's correct. I mean, I think that's correct because you see many politicians from here, Arizona. The elections are closed or have been closed, and they absolutely, you can say how they lie. They lie in Fox News, they lie in CNN, they lie when they go on TV. Even the same, the governor, she lies. She said that there was dead, beheaded bodies in the desert here in Arizona, which wasn't correct. I mean, everybody knows that there's been beheaded bodies in Mexico, but not here in Arizona. You see John McCain saying that some illegal drivers are crashing their cars intentionally, with a purpose. You hear Russell Pierce, I mean, what can I say? But yeah, they're actually big time profiting on this political capital that you can call the elections and about the immigration, And the irony here is that actually what I saw when this last time of turmoil there was about the SB 2070 is that the Tea Parties are actually taking a desperate stand against globalization. And in this case, the Mexicans are the ones who are representing globalization in terms of they represent the no borders when it comes to labor, when it comes to capital. The globalization has proved that on and on, the capital overcomes any barrier, like Marx says, that's being put forward, So in this case, the Mexicans represent that. And the Tea Parties, ironically, even they don't know. They are standing up against that, which is what their politicians use as a flag, globalization and free market.
I thought when I first heard about the hate wall, as you call it, between Mexico and Arizona, when I first heard about it, I thought it was Mexico was trying to keep the white trailer trash from going down to South America, where the economy is booming in Mexico and Brazil and in the South, because these countries actually have resources. Are you going to let them through the wall?
I think you're certainly right in terms of the recession here and the big crisis you can see. And actually, I intended to make a report last year how many Americans are actually leaving their countries to look for jobs. And when I came here with my wife, I told her what was happening. And they're going to implode the economy just like they did in Argentina, just like they did in my country. They're going to claim that the banks are in trouble, and they're going to take the state to pay for it. And they take the taxpayers' money to do it, all those kind of things. And then at the end, they're going to own a lot of money, and the big banks and big money are going to come and say, hey, well, I want your daughter. I want your dog because you owe me money. So that's exactly what they did in my country, what they did in Argentina, what they did many other places down south the border. And when I got here, I told my wife that, and certainly, boom, that economic coup d'etat that happened in September 2008, they did it.
The Argentina story is a good story because the government of Argentina allowed Citibank to dump all of its toxic debts into the government's balance sheet, and then the government forced the public to pay Citibank's debts. Flash forward to 2010. The Federal Reserve has been forced at gunpoint by Congress to accept all of Citibank, once again, and all the other banks on Wall Street, all their toxic waste. And once again, the government's saying, well, we don't want to abrogate our contract with the financial terrorists. You have to pay for it, citizens. You didn't rack up this debt, but you're going to have to live like slaves and indentured servants anyway. And remember, in Argentina, 2000, 2001, the people are on the street banging pots and pans, and the rich people are driving away in limousines with all the money. This is exactly what's going to happen in the U.S.
I've lived that in my own flesh. 2 times. I lost all my savings the first time. The second time, I lost all my business, and I know that for people in the street, it's hard to understand why does that happen and really find the truth of that, because it's always easy to put a tag or just blame in certain politicians like, oh, it's your fault. But we know it's not like that. We know, like, it's just the same as when you say, oh, well, the country's not working. It's not because certain politicians did this or not. It's because the power doesn't lie in the politicians, in the politics system anymore. The countries are out. You say in and out, well, they're out. And now the globalization is a power that just grows beyond control. And I'm, I fear that has some other consequences that goes beyond the supposedly control of those who plan all the schemes, like Waldo Emerson says, events ride the saddle and mankind is in the back seat. And I think it's just like that, maybe some of these bankers or whoever is up there is underestimating the way that mankind is, There's no way to control what's happening now in terms of the people, how they feel here in the United States. You can see a total turn to the right, and you see all these neo-fascism and racism, and throwing fingers. And if the economy doesn't get better, which is probably not very alike, you can see that that's going to be exacerbated, and to what end we don't know. We just can fear and try to hope is not what happened down there in the south, because it can end up being in fascism, and just like Chile or Argentina when they made the coups, it can happen. That the fact that there's no democracy doesn't mean there's no market. So democracy is not really essential for the business elite.
So guys like John Perkins, who wrote the book Financial Hitmen, of course, talks about these coups in these countries that end up as a result of the leaders not ascribing to the financial plans of the Wall Street bankers, and then they have a regime change. And we've seen it in South America, of course, and now we're seeing it in the U.S. And Barry Ritholtz, who's a very well-respected financial blogger in the United States, he recently wrote a piece saying that it's no longer about right versus left. It's about the people versus the corporations. And in this Arizona immigration fandango down in the southern part of the United States, the politicians want to present it as right versus left, but it's completely false, isn't it? It's really about the corporations who want to erect a huge toll booth on everything that goes any which way in the economy versus the people who are being forced to pay these tolls. How do you see that emerging?
They are actually writing, and sometimes they provoke in the stage events and false flag attacks or God knows what. But some other times they just write it. So they take certain issue and try to get the benefits of it. And if you see, there's no way that any left or right can do anything about it, again, because there's no solution. I mean, the solution will be too radical, and the United States will have to close these borders in terms of start over constructing their economy again after they deindustrialize the country. They depend so much in everything outside, so there's no way that they can close that bond. They can close that consequence, if you want, the backlash of the globalization that they created. And like always, it's caused by some people at the top, but it's always sweat and tear by those in the ground, which is the people in here. And I feel bad sometimes because you see all these Tea Party people and all the white people here, they're very misinformed, and some of them are really good persons. Once you get to, to talk to them, make them see how that plays, sometimes they open their eyes and say, hey, maybe I wasn't right in just getting my information through Fox News, because they're actually, just like you say, they're playing them. And left and right, to me, when they hear me saying and talking against globalization, it's not because I'm from the left, because I know that for firsthand that doesn't exist. In my very same country, the people, like in my last documentary, was about the revolution, how they took down the third president in a row because he was totally subservient to the World Monetary Fund. And the people in the street, they woke up. They know, in my country, they know what's going on. You can see that in this quote unquote revolution that happened. And at the end of the day, the problem is that once the people goes back to work, there's a way, just like John Perkins said, there's a way to carry everything back in line, and if there's regime that doesn't go that way, well, there's a way to take care of those. And I don't mean that it's the U.S. government who's doing that. I mean, I think it's the power doesn't lie there anymore. The power is way behind the curtains, and let me put it this way. Let's say that you have a really bad infection here because you've been doing heroin, right? Instead of saying, hey, we got to stop doing heroin, they try to just like put some alcohol in here and try to cure the local wound. When we know that unless they cut those bad habits, quote unquote, again, it's not going to wound, it's not going to heal, it's never going to heal.
Right. In this case, you could replace the word heroin with NAFTA, because NAFTA certainly set up the situation where American subsidized corn products were dumped in South America, which caused huge economic dislocation. American meat packers were bringing labor up from the South at slave labor wages. Again, huge economic dislocation. It was Bill Clinton causing a horrible slave mentality to be inculcated amongst the American corporations to victimize Mexicans and South Americans. And now that the folks are migrating up north of the border, people are making this out to be as if this was not completely predictable under what frickin' Bill Clinton did with NAFTA. Anyway, Oscar, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Oh, my pleasure, Max. Keep the good work.
All righty. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. And I want to thank my guest, Oscar Leon. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.